The fuses are lit, 6 of them, braided into your beard, smoking in the salt air, and the merchant captain across the quarterdeck is looking at you the way men look at things they cannot explain. Not fear yet. Fear comes second. First comes the failure of categories the moment the mind tries to file what it's seeing and discovers it has no folder for it. You watch him fail to find the folder. You give him time. The smoke curls up past your jaw, past your cheekbone, past the brim of your hat, and you stand completely still in the middle of it because stillness in the middle of smoke is the whole message. You don't need to say anything. You never need to say anything. The theater does the work. He surrenders the ship in 4 minutes. That's a record, though you're not keeping records anymore. You stopped keeping records around the time you stopped needing to. You were Edward Teach before you were anything else, which is a name that nobody remembers now and which served you well enough in Bristol until the war gave you a better education than Bristol ever could. The Queen Anne's War pulled men off the docks and put them on privateering vessels with letters of marque that said, in the careful language of governments that need things done without appearing to do them, you may take enemy ships. The letter doesn't explain what happens to the men who become good at taking ships when the war ends, and the letter expires and suddenly, the skill set is the crime. The war ended in 1713. That's the year the category changed. You'd been sailing under Benjamin Hornigold for 2 years by then. Hornigold was a careful man, methodical, with the specific quality of a former privateer who understood that the distance between legal and illegal was a document and that documents could be reissued. He believed, for longer than the evidence supported, that England would recognize the practical value of men like him and find a way to make it official again. You understood earlier than he did that England had decided otherwise. What England wanted was the shipping lanes cleared, and men who'd spent a decade learning to disrupt shipping lanes were the disruption now. You took command of your first vessel in 1717. Not through mutiny. Hornigold gave it to you, a captured sloop that needed a captain and a crew and someone with the judgment to handle both. The judgment was the thing he saw in you before you fully saw it in yourself. Not courage. He'd seen courage in men who died from it. What he saw was the ability to understand a situation faster than the situation was developing and to make decisions that accounted for what was coming rather than just what was present. The vessel was the Revenge. You renamed her. The renaming was partly practical. A ship's reputation travels faster than the ship itself, and you were building a reputation that needed a different name attached to it. The Queen Anne's Revenge was the name you chose, which was a statement about the letter of marque and who had betrayed whom, though you told no one that. Let them wonder. Wondering was useful. Certainty was the enemy of fear, and fear, correctly managed, was the most efficient tool available. The beard came later and also came first, depending on how you count. The beard was always there, growing since your teens, black and dense in a way that seemed to embarrass people who thought facial hair should have limits. You grew it deliberately past those limits. The fuses were an addition from the second year. Someone's offhand remark about the smoke, about how you looked standing in gun smoke after aborting, gave you the idea, and you refined it over several months, the way you refined everything, through iteration, through attention to what worked and what didn't, through the gap between theory and practice. The fuses worked, the smoke worked, the stillness in the middle of it worked. You became, deliberately and systematically, a thing the human mind couldn't file. The name Blackbeard arrived without your help, which is how you knew it was right. Names you give yourself are wishes. Names that arrive from outside are diagnoses. The crew is the thing nobody talks about correctly. The stories make it simple. A pirate captain commands through terror, and terror holds the ship together. That's true the way most simple things are true. Partially, in certain conditions, with important exceptions that undermine the whole frame. Terror keeps men obedient. It doesn't keep them capable. A terrified crew runs a ship into the rocks because terror and good seamanship are not compatible conditions, and you need good seamanship every hour of every day in the Atlantic in the winter. Regardless of whether anyone is watching, what you actually ran was something more complicated. The articles were written, every man signs, every man knows the rules, the share of prizes is fixed and visible, and not subject to your mood. This matters more than people understand. A man who knows exactly what he'll receive for a successful action and exactly what the consequences are for specific violations is a man who can make rational decisions, and rational decisions in a crisis are what keep everyone alive. The articles weren't charity. They were engineering. The crew called you captain. They also called you other things when they thought you couldn't hear, which you always could, and which you allowed because the thing they called you in those moments was honest, and honesty, from the people working your ship, was more valuable than formality. You learned more from what men said, when they forgot you were listening, than from anything they said directly to you. The flagship by 1717 was the Queen Anne's Revenge herself, a French slaver you took off Martinique, 40 cannons, enough to make any naval captain calculate twice before engaging. The size was the point. You were not, by preference, a man who fought. Fighting was expensive, in lives and in time and in the wear it put on ships that needed to keep sailing. What you were was a man who made fighting seem like the worse option, who arranged every approach so that the merchant captain on the receiving end looked at the situation and reached the same conclusion independently. The fuses, the smoke, the flag, the reputation that traveled faster than the ship. All of it was calibrated to produce surrender. Not battle, surrender. The taking was almost incidental. What you were actually doing was convincing, continuously, that the cost of resistance exceeded the cost of compliance. You were good at convincing. You'd been doing it since Bristol, since the docks, since before you knew it was a skill rather than just something you did. Month 14 of the flagship, you blockaded Charleston. That needs to be said plainly because the stories either inflate it into something mythological or reduce it to a footnote in someone else's history. You blockaded the largest port in the American colonies for a week with 4 ships and your reputation, and the thing you asked for in exchange for releasing the ships you'd taken was medicine, not gold. Not powder. A chest of medicine, because your crew had illness moving through them and the nearest surgeon worth the name was in a city you just blockaded, which was a problem of your own construction. They sent the medicine. That's what people forget they sent it. A city, a government, a colonial administration decided that the cost of the medicine was lower than the cost of whatever you might do if they didn't. You held a city hostage with sick men and a reputation, and it worked because the reputation was real, and everyone knew it was real, and the medicine was just medicine. You released the ships. All of them. Everyone. That detail also gets forgotten. The pardon arrived from Governor Eden of North Carolina in 1718. Not because you asked you didn't, but because the Crown had decided that blanket pardons were more efficient than hunting men individually across an ocean. And efficiency was something governments understood even when mercy wasn't available. You took the pardon. You settled briefly in Bath. You married, formally, which was the 4th or 5th marriage depending on which count you trusted and which women's accounts had reached which magistrates, and the formality of it meant something even if the permanence was always theoretical. The pardon lasted 10 months. Here's what you understood about pardons that the Crown apparently did not. A pardon is a document. Documents require the conditions that produce them to continue producing them. The conditions had changed the war, the letters of marque, the official tolerance for men who disrupted trade on behalf of the right flags. None of that was coming back. The pardon was a door to a room that had no other exits, and you walked through it with the same clear accounting you applied to everything. You went back to sea in the autumn. Not from desperation. Not from the failure of the legitimate life to hold you. From the recognition that you had become Blackbeard thoroughly enough that Edward Teach was a fiction you could visit but not inhabit. The way you could visit Bristol but couldn't go back to standing on those docks with that name and that life like they still fit. They didn't fit. 5 years of becoming something had made the something real, and the before thing a costume. The last engagement is worth describing correctly, because the wrong version has been told so often the wrong version is what people believe. Lieutenant Maynard came with 2 sloops and orders from Governor Spotswood of Virginia, who had no jurisdiction over North Carolina waters and issued the orders anyway because jurisdiction was also a document and documents bended when there was enough political will behind the bending. You knew he was coming. You knew the way you'd always known things that were developing toward you by reading the pattern, by feeling the change in what people said and didn't say, by the specific quality of silence that settles over a situation when something has already been decided. You could have run. The math supported running. The shallow inlet where you'd anchored the adventure was navigable to you and not to Maynard's deeper-hold sloops, and making the open sea before they could engage was a realistic option that several of your crew were actively advocating for. You didn't run. Not bravado, not the death wish the stories assign you, the romantic fatalism of a man who'd lived too long at the edge of everything. The decision was the same accounting you'd applied to every decision. What does it cost to run versus what does it cost to fight, and which cost can you absorb? Running meant running forever, which was a cost that compounded, and the compounding had been building for 5 years and you could feel its weight. The pardon had shown you the shape of the cage that running would eventually become. Smaller and smaller water, shallower and shallower options, until the accounting stopped working no matter which way you ran it. You fought. The battle lasted 2 hours. Maynard was a capable officer with orders he intended to honor and the tactical advantage of numbers and surprise in the boarding action. You took 5 musket balls and 20 sword wounds before you stopped. The accounts vary on the exact sequence and you are not in a position to correct them. What is accurate is this. You held the deck of your own ship for 2 hours against a planned military engagement designed specifically to end you, with a crew that had been reduced by attrition and the winter, and the particular mathematics of a life that doesn't leave much room for recruitment. 2 hours. And the last thing you would have seen, the last thing the accounting would have registered was the water around the Adventure, which you knew better than any other water in the Atlantic, which you'd navigated in the dark by feel and memory, and the sound of the depth changing underfoot. Your water, your ship, your accounting, final and complete. Maynard took the head. That part is in every version, and every version is correct. He hung it from the bowsprit to sail into port with, which was the official announcement that Blackbeard was finished, that the thing the human mind couldn't file had been filed. They were wrong about that. Not sentimentally. Practically. The filing happened on their end. On the water. In the stories. In every merchant captain who heard the name for years after and felt the folder fail to open, the thing kept moving. Things that become real enough don't stop when the person does. Edward Teach stopped. Blackbeard didn't stop. That distinction is the whole of it.